I have a personal rule that the third time that somebody asks me something in the community in the same day, instead of answering their question directly, I'm going to make a video about it. Because I find that if that is something that people ask about with enough frequency, it's easier and more valuable for me to create some content related to it and then sharing it with a bit more of an explanation that I can give on a circular or cursory basis in YouTube comments, on Reddit, on Discord, or wherever it may be that somebody's asking for that kind of information. Now, following the events that unfolded yesterday in the Pleiades, a lot of people have been asking me about my Corsair build in the great bounty hunt that followed me, and the 72 billion credit bounty that was on my head down in the Pleiades, for what was a 2-hour cat and mouse game where I was effectively trying my best to staying alive, jumping from one place to the next, and selectively giving battle with my amazing wingmates when circumstances allowed for that, and ultimately heading to a final showdown at the nav beacon of Asterope, where I was counting on wholesome group of friendlies to be there to protect me, but alas, I ended up in the clutches of a full BSEC combat wing armed to the teeth, and the rest is history. And regarding that history, once again, congrats Commander Ploto for claiming that bounty, which he wholeheartedly earned. Nevertheless, as far as ships go, this build that I will be talking about here has been called in Discord terms such as Un-Gank-Able and the like, which honestly is a little bit kind of nonsensical because no build in and of itself is ungankable. So there's more to it than that. But the right combination of a build that has certain characteristics and tactics employed to defend yourself can be extraordinarily effective at keeping you alive, as I think the 2 hours jumping around a defined environment in the Pleiades within a certain number of systems, with the whole world having a 1-minute delayed stream of exactly what I was doing, and nevertheless managing to survive for that long, I think demonstrates that it is quite possible to defend yourself effectively with certain strategies and with a certain approach to builds. Now, furthermore, this build, or an earlier version of this build, was even leaked as one of the things that in situations like this you need to keep in mind is what we call OPSEC, or operational security. I made the mistake of leaving my Inara account connected and updating automatically, which leaked my Corsair build, or again, an earlier version of this build, to the masses, which gave a further advantage to the hunters, which, again, nominally would have made things easier for them as far as information is concerned. There are other multiple OPSEC issues that came into this event, by the way. My friends list was way too big, and not everybody on my friends list was acting friendly yesterday, so that had to be cleaned up. People were tracking my carrier by dropping modules onto it, knowing by looking at where their module ended up being, where my carrier had gone at any given point in time, and a number of other ways that people were sort of like keeping track of what I was doing. But nevertheless, let's get to it and let's talk about the build first and the strategies next, even though I will probably argue that the strategies are more important than the build. Now, you need a build that is at least somewhat survivable. However, it is not necessary to have a build that is min-maxed and completely optimized for survivability, as this one effectively was. So, again, let's talk about the build and then let's get into the strategies. But keep in mind, I think the strategies are actually more important than the build. So first and foremost, Corsair. Why the Corsair? Well, that's an interesting question, because as far as PvP builds are concerned, the Corsair certainly is not the only option. And as far as popularity of PvP builds are concerned, it certainly has a lot of competition, at the very least from the FDL and from the Python Mark II, and in some cases also from the Cutter. Now, even though with a different role, if we shall. The Corsair is somewhat unique, however, in that it is able to be, at the same time, incredibly fast, as this thing boosts to almost up to 600 meters per second, while also being able to be incredibly tanky, which is something the FDL can't really say for itself. The FDL has incredible shields and outstanding maneuverability, but is not quite as fast, and certainly is nowhere nearly as tanky, especially in the doomsday scenario of it losing its shields. It would be in a really, really tough predicament. The Cutter certainly has the strongest shields in the game, effectively, and again, in the proper circumstances, is an incredibly strong defensive ship. However, it's not particularly fun to fly, and it also has a terrible reputation among the PvP community. So I decided not to go with that one. And that left me with the Corsair, which, again, has this ability of being incredibly tanky and really, really fast. Before we go into outfitting, again, I really maxed this thing and tried to think really everything through. So I started with a livery, which really makes a very, very tiny difference. So it's not like some of the things we're going to talk here make all the difference. But I did go with a midnight black paint job, which, by the way, is my favorite paint job, and is the paint job that is more or less a default of Xeno Strike Force overall. So it's something that I'm sure I'll be using also for other reasons. And blue coloring engines and weapon detailing, which, coupled with no decals and no identification, results in a completely unmarked ship, which is very hard to see in the blackness background of space. Now, for most experienced hostiles, that won't matter that much, because it is more likely than not that they will be using night vision, and so they will be able to see you just fine. But again, you never know. It's one of those small things that kind of can give you a truly minor edge, but other things being equal, why not? So this is the livery of choice of this unmarked Corsair, if you want. When it comes to outfittings, the hardpoint selection for a ship that is designed for defense actually doesn't matter that much. Now, I was intending to fight, even though I fully knew that I was going to be primary targeted by pretty much anyone that I was ever going to come across, and as a result, I was going to need to fly defensively and keep my distance, lest I be dogpiled and destroyed in practically no time. So the weapon of choices for the Corsair are generally pacifier fragmentation cannons, and either railguns, or in some cases, I guess you could also go with plasma accelerators. However, the issue for yours truly is that, as pretty much everyone knows, I am not a PvP player, and consequently, at least as far high-end gameplay is concerned, I can't hit the broadside of a barn with plasma accelerators. Certainly not in a combat situation where people are boosting, moving, and highly skilled at this. What, however, I do have some experience with is Guardian Shard cannons and Guardian Gauss cannons. Those, I think I can say I know how to shoot and I know how to aim. And what are the equivalents in terms of human weapons? The equivalent of shard cannons are fragmentation cannons, or pacifiers in this case, and the equivalent of Gauss cannons are railguns, which actually happen to be exceptionally similar to Gauss cannons in the way they fire. And those, I know I can aim and I know I can shoot. So, as a result, I decided to go with pacifier fragmentation cannons and long-range railguns. In terms of modifications, this was the subject of a lot of debate and kind of imagining and designing this build. And honestly, I think net-net the differences are probably overall pretty small. I went with rapid-fire screening shell. However, you could go with overcharged and incendiary. You could even go with double shot if you're just going for the alpha damage of it. Even that would work. Most likely with incendiary at that point as well. Rapid fire has the benefit of having an absolutely insane sustained amount of damage per second. However, it runs out of ammo incredibly quickly and worsens your jitter to a degree, which doesn't make it ideal for sustained firefights. But if you're not planning to actually engage on a sustained period of time because you expect to be completely dogpiled on, then rapid fire can work. In hindsight, would I have done something different? In hindsight, probably double shot based on like how the fights unfolded that I was doing would have been slightly better, but honestly, I don't think this made a difference in practice very much at all. So rapid fire with screen shell was kind of fine, I guess. In terms of railguns, these are the kind of flip side of a passive fire fragmentation cannons, which are kind of mostly short range weapons. Railguns instead are long range weapons. And with a long range experimental, these things can hit up to 6 kilometers away, which is a significant difference. And they generally come in two typical experimental choices. Either super penetrator, which wrecks modules once shields drop, or feedback cascade, which has the ability to cancel enemy commanders' shield cell banks. In this case, I went with with two super penetrators and one feedback cascade. In hindsight, I probably would have gone with two feedback cascade and one super penetrator, or even maybe three feedback cascade, because again, my role in this fight wasn't to be the main damage dealer. I did not want to, and I sustainably could not get close to the action more than a sort of small and select amount of time. And as a result, the ability to cancel enemy commander's bank was the thing that was probably most viable in using these rails against enemy commanders. And a single rail is only moderately effective at canceling enemy banks. Having two is typically more than enough. A third one would have been overkill, but it would also have had some margin of error in case I didn't land all three on commanders that were banking. So again, in hindsight, that may be something that I changed. But all in all, again, weapons for builds that are so defensive aren't the key component and the things that matter the most. They are something that are worth considering, but mostly in the context also of what your wing is flying and how you expect to fight and fly as a wing. When it comes to utilities, 3 of the utilities were essentially spoken for, which were 0A shield boosters, thermal resistant supercapacitors, resistance augmented supercapacitor, and heavy duty supercapacitor. This is what effectively optimizes the shields of a Corsair. There's practically nothing to say about these. These are effectively necessary if you want to have a reasonably solid shield tank. And these are also particularly important if you plan to run shield cell banks, which this ship has plenty of. We'll get to that in a minute. Because obviously the value of shield cell banks gets multiplied by the resistance that your shields have. So the higher resistances, the more effective the shield banks are in sustaining you and keeping you alive in the longer term. When it comes to heat sinks, when it comes to the 4th slot, however, that was a bit more of a question mark. I ultimately went with heat sinks for a reason, and this is a serious pre-engineered heat sink, which is the best heat sink in the game, because shield shell banks, and we'll get to that in a moment, run incredibly hot. As in, they will actively raise your heat to a point where your modules get damaged hot. And considering the need of the ship to, in many cases, double bank, your heat will just skyrocket through the roof, and you will take significant module damage. With significant module damage comes the risk of module malfunctions. The risk of module malfunctions is a great and fantastic way to die if you're trying to get away. So you want to avoid and contain module damage as much as possible. And heat sinks are a semi-reliable way to do that, noting that they won't allow you to keep your heat entirely under 100%, but they will minimize the module damage that you will take by double banking. You could go with a different option. Like you could try, for example, the community goal point defense turrets, but honestly, like missiles and like guided and unguided ammunition really wasn't the main issue here. So that would not have been a great choice in hindsight. You could have gone with a 4th booster. That would have been helpful in making the shields even tankier, but the module damage from heat, I think, would more than have overtaken that in terms of utility. So net, also with the benefit of hindsight, I think this configuration of 3 boosters and 1 heatsink launcher was the way to go. When it comes to core internal, you obviously want the best armor you can get. a mirrored surface composite with heavy duty and deep plating is the way to go, in my view. You could put you could go, and this is the whole story about funny hull and funny how mechanics work. You could do a little bit of a funny hull build, but with effectively a shield tank and what you need to carry for a shield tank to work, which is SCBs. You're not going to be doing much funny hull anyway. So going with mirrored surface composite with heavy duty armor instead of reflective armor just gives you better absolute integrity, and is something that I felt gave me more comfort and confidence rather than trying to optimize for resistances instead, which have made me far more exposed to absolute damage of PAs and rams. So heavy duty it was. The power plant is probably the thing I am less happy and most frustrated about of this build, because I ended up having to go with overcharged G5 monstered, which is the highest output power plant that you can possibly design. The problem with this is that it also has the worst heat efficiency of any power plant you could possibly kit as far as A-rated power plants are concerned. So this build overheats even just by charging your Super Cruise drive, and that's annoying. Again, of all the things that I needed to contend with, it was probably not the most annoying. There are variations of SCB configurations that allow you to run more efficient power plant, but they require you to mess with power priorities and have to bring SCBs online while juggling other things. And candidly, I didn't want to have to do that. So I said, all right, let's run a little bit hotter. Let's have deal with overheating a little bit more as needed, but let's not start juggling activation of modules on the go, because we already have very significant cognitive load in these 2 hours that we are essentially trying to evade. And so it's just something that I've accepted as a compromise for lower cognitive load of not having to deal with bringing online modules and the like. Thrusters are dirty drive, tuner, and drag drives. That goes without saying. I know people will have to joke that I would have loved to put clean drives on this. For anyone that kind of hears that joke, clean drives only go on shielded Titan bomber builds, and that's only to stay under the heat detection threshold of Titans while operating in Titan space. That's the only reason to use clean drives pretty much ever. For pretty much anything else, go dirty drives, drag drives, no questions. The frameshift drive, now this one's interesting because this is the pre-engineered SCO frameshift drive, which is available for purchase with materials using Titan drive component, Fargoid Titan drive component, which has double engineering. So this shows up as increased range, but this is really double engineered for both increased range and fast boot. So as you can see, the boot time of this drive is increased to only 2 seconds from the normal increased boot time of 10 seconds. Now, this is really important and makes a big difference as far as gank evasion. Probably the biggest difference of almost all the things that we talked about so far. Why is that? The reason it makes such a difference is because in facing ganking and defending against ganking, you will find that people will be shooting so-called groms at you, which are, what are they formally called? I don't even know what they're technically called. They're called containment missiles, I think, which are a power play module, which effectively sort of locks out your frameshift drive and prevents it from rebooting for a period of time. Like groms with the sort of interrupt experimental lock your FSD out for 18 seconds. The problem with that, however, is that then your drive needs to reboot. So if you don't have a fast boot drive, the total amount of time that your drive is locked out is 18 seconds plus 10 seconds of reboot time, which is a whole 28 seconds, which is a very significant amount of time. However, if you have a frameshift drive, optimized drive, that amount of time is cut down to only 18 plus 2, 20 seconds. And those 8 seconds can be the difference between getting away and not getting away in some cases. So fast boot drives are incredibly powerful in helping people evade ganks. And something that, again, if you're playing in open or playing in a situation where you expect to be evading ganks, using these pre-engineered drives that have both increased range and fast boot is highly, highly, highly recommended. Although they are expensive, like in terms of materials, so they're not a small investment, but it is a worthwhile one, I believe, overall. Lightweight is, life support is lightweight. It's not much of a reason to do 4D lightweight, not much of a reason to do anything with that. Power distributors, charge enhanced super conduits. I think nobody's going to be surprised with that. Sensors are long range. Now, sensors being long range in a situation like this, when you want maximum situation awareness for what is possible, what's going around you, is definitely desirable. Now, this does increase the mass of the sensors in a non-completely insignificant manner, up to 32 tons, which will eventually slow down even the mighty Class 8 drives of the Corsair, as we will get above the minimum thruster mass of this ship, which is almost unheard of because this ship has like crazy high minimum thruster mass. But as you can see from down here, the top speed of a ship is not its peak of 600 meters per second, but is, quote, only 593 meters per second. Whether that 7 meters per second matters to you in terms of weight that you carry around or not is up for debate. It worked for me. That 7 meters per second was, again, one of those compromises I decided to accept, which also kind of runs counter to how I generally think about my builds, because I will almost always take speed over tank in AX builds. That's because I am very, very, very confident about my abilities when I do anti-Xeno combat. I am not nearly as confident. In fact, I'm not confident at all when it comes to my PvP and ganking defense skills. And as a result, I decided to sacrifice that 7 meters per second. It, I think, didn't end up making a difference. But it is one of those compromises to be cognizant about. As in, even if you're trying to get away from another Corsair that kind of is lighter, that 7 meters per second over more sustained period of time actually compounds and matters. So not something to just completely forget. So this was the core internals, and then full fuel tank, because you want to be able to get places and not run out of fuel. So, and that's pretty straightforward. When it comes to optionals, I'm going to skip the class 6s for a moment, and I'm going to start by the class 5A prismatic shield generator. Again, this is a power play module, so not exactly generally available, but it is the class of shields that have the highest overall integrity in the game, at the cost, quote, of being incredibly heavy and having a pathetically low recharge rate. So you're trading essentially really high capacity of shields for the fact that they take freaking forever to recharge. These things are so slow to recharge that even docked at a carrier or at a station, you will find that they're pretty slow at recharging. So something to keep in mind. With reinforced and high capacity, that's something that, again, is, I think, pretty straightforward for the purpose of this build. I did consider Bioweaves. For their ability to recharge much more quickly, especially since I was expecting to be in and out of instances. I said, maybe I should go Bioweaves, since I should be able to recharge them as I get in and out. But in hindsight, I am glad I went with prismatics, as they have much stronger integrity, and I didn't find myself in a situation where I needed to recharge my shields in Super Cruise, and I didn't have banks, which kind of do a job for you. If you ever find yourself in a situation where you do need that recharge, you can use banks also in Super Cruise, at the price of, obviously, heat generation. And then the rest of the optional internals are, for the most part, shield shell banks. So 6A, 6B, 6B, 5B, 5B, 5 banks, which lends this build what it's kind of effectively its namesake, which is a bank tank Corsair. Like, if you were to talk about this build in general terms, you would talk about it as a bank tank Corsair. And these collection of shield shell banks are all equipped with rapid charge shield shell banks with recycling cell, which are the general go-to for player versus player combat, which furthermore have grade 4 engineering, which is only available in Colonia. This is something I have pinned from my long ago journey to Colonia. which, again, results in a spin-up time of only 3 seconds. Why does this matter, and why does rapid charge in general versus, like in P versus player matter? Because people will be running the railguns that I was showing you earlier, which have feedback cascade. And feedback cascade cancels your banks if it hits you while those banks are spinning up. But the faster those banks spin up, the shorter the interval in which your banks can be canceled. And canceling someone who is spinning up G4 rapid charge banks is very difficult, because you have essentially 3 seconds from seeing and identifying that somebody is banking to being able to train your guns on target to charging your railgun and hitting them. So the marginal response is incredibly tight. So this makes rapid charge SCBs very difficult to cancel, and as a result, far more effective than the major alternative, which is specialized banks. 5 SCBs take an enormous amount of power grid, which is why we get to that overcharge G5 power plant. Again, you could turn some of these off and downgrade your power plant, which some of the builds that I had tested earlier did. And by the way, I'll get back in a moment to some of the other things that I tested as I was kind of like thinking this through. However, the problem with rapid charge steel shell banks is that their boot time is very significant. Their boot time is 31 seconds. And who has 31 seconds while the whole world is trying to get a bounty of 72 billion on your head? I didn't. I didn't felt I ever would have had this amount of time if I ever needed to boot these up, which is why I decided to have them brought all online and run the overcharge power plant instead. I did experiment early on with having these 2 steel shell banks, instead of being rapid charge, being specialized, which significantly cuts down the boot time of those, which would have allowed to bring these online at a fraction of the time. However, then you get into the problem of them being canceled, and honestly, it doesn't really help you if you bring these online if when you need to use them, they get immediately canceled. So I dropped that idea, and instead I went with 5 rapid charge SCBs with recycling cell. The rest is insurance. The rest is hard reinforcement packages, which are a mix of heavy duty and kinetic resistance and blast resistance to sort of balance out the overall resistances of my ship. I don't know if I actually show in here. There you go. Armor resistances are 28%, 52%, and 34%, which are not fantastic, but for what is effectively insurance, aren't terrible either. What this effectively allows you to hope is that if your shields ever break, which most of the time means you die, you have at least a final chance and a final shot to get away, because it means you don't instantly die. However, don't expect miracles. Yes, you have almost 3K hull, so you're not completely made of paper. However, any decent person who's coming after you will effectively chew through your armor and significantly damage your modules, or snipe your power plant, or snipe your thrusters, or otherwise cripple your ship in a million different ways. You don't want your shields to break. This is really a bit of an insurance of last resort. I did play with the idea of actually using Guardian shield reinforcement packages. There is such a thing as shield reinforcement packages. They are actually only available in the Guardian version, and by funny thing, they're actually classified under hull. But these use power, and they have a fixed amount of reinforcement, which is also not a lot, so they're not the greatest module, certainly not for a build like this. So yeah, those were not used. And one last thing, which I forgot to mention when it comes to kind of weapons, is I initially experimented with only one rail, and I initially experimented with mines. I experimented initially with shock mines and then with regular mines, with a combination of the ion disruptor effect and the reverberation cascade effect. those are generally rare experimental effects, which I think feedback reverberation cascade is available on torpedoes. I know that, and on mines. I don't know if it's available on a lot of other things, but if it is, and not all that common kind of things, reverberation cascade directly damages shield generators. And if you hit enough of those, you can basically knock out somebody's shields without actually having to take their shields down. So if you can hit with it, it's an incredibly powerful effect. Ion Disruptor, which again I think is an effect that is only available on mines, of all things, actually knocks your thrusters out for non-trivial amount of time. I think it's 10 seconds or something like that. Someone, again, in the comments can keep me honest. But being dead in the water, as far as thrusters are concerned, for 10 seconds in high-stakes circumstances like these is incredibly dangerous and incredibly powerful if you're able to do that to others who are coming after you. The problem with mines is that I found that I can't hit anything for the life of me with them, and it's more likely that I end up hitting myself or a wingmate with them than I am to hit any hostiles at all. And as a result, I found them so difficult to use in this kind of wing setting that I decided to not to use them at all and drop them. Like, in fact, I think the build that was leaked originally had mines, and as everybody can see and saw from the stream, those mines were dropped in favor of rails. Not because mines are not powerful; they're very powerful if you know and can effectively use them. I do not have the skill nor experience to use them, and as a result, I gave up on using them and I switched to rails instead. And that's about it as far as the build is concerned. I think maybe the last thing to kind of know is what fire groups are configured. I had railguns on my first trigger and fragmentation count on my second, and then I had SCBs on my first and second fire group in the next fire group. This is not because I actually ever used them this way. The only reason I have them configured this way is because there's a bug right now that doesn't allow you to see how many ammo you have left in modules in your module view. See, but you can't tell how many you have from pretty much any view here. So I actually kind of swapped I used fire groups to basically bring up the screen and said, okay, I still have 4 SCBs on the 6s and 4 and 4 on the 5s. So that's really the only reason I had them in this fire group, was to know how much ammo I had very quickly without... Actually, don't even know how I would have done it if I didn't do it that way. I guess there's probably maybe some magic of a way to do it, but that's something I used to know how much ammo I had in them. And then again, the rest is pretty straightforward. In terms of pips configuration and pips overall, like, this is a ship that's meant to fly defensively. So you want to keep on shielded builds 4 pips in system as much as possible when you're not actively targeting or hunting someone, because that is what maximizes not only your shield recharge, but more importantly, the resistances of your shields. And the effect is very, very powerful, as in being caught without pips in sys at all, like in a combat configuration like this one, for instance, is what, again, in the PvP community, I am told, is known as being pip checked, which is not a good thing. It means you've taken far more damage than you would have needed to if you were to set your pips correctly in anticipating and protecting and defending from damage. Now, when you're not in 4-2-0 configuration, because actually you want to do some damage, the other setup I had, which I've commonly used, is 0.5 in system, 4 in engine, and 1.5 in weapons. More aggressive builds that make stronger use or bigger use of their weapons would probably dump more pips in weapon than engine, but for what I did, which was mostly rely on the pacifiers, which use almost no system capacitor energy, and the occasional rail hit, I felt that 1.5 in weapon was more than fit for purpose. And that's just about it. The only thing that I will maybe add in terms of how things are used is I have a lot of keybinds. Like, one important keybind is triggering and firing SCBs. And in many cases, in this build, you want to double bank. And I guess I'll show you with, like, the purpose of, like, Like, if you say take a decent amount of shield damage, which ramming into my own carrier would hopefully do, and like, you want to double bank and pop a heat sink right away. Look at what's doing to my heat, by the way. Like, this is a double bank. Still, the heat is back below 100, so that heat sink did its job. But double banking was enough to take me from 64%, was it 64% or whatever the number is, all the way back to 100% in a handful of seconds. So this, when people talk about bank tanks and the power of bank tanks, this is effectively what they're talking about, right? And kind of do the same, just to kind of like show that again. And 60% shields. I'll start heatsink first is actually ideal, then double tank, actually triple bank here, so that's a mistake. I kind of tap an additional one, but like if you ever needed to, I guess you could triple bank, but I probably pop another heatsink to get my heat back to a reasonable level. But look at the damage this does to your modules, right? So like modules are already at like 97, 90, in some cases even 91%. And stuff that gets under 80 starts heavily malfunctioning. And if your cargo hatch malfunction here, nobody really cares at all. But if your FSD starts malfunctioning, that's when you're really in trouble. And this is not a build I can repair other than kind of docking carriers or stations at all. So again, something to keep in mind. So this is kind of really, you know, it in terms of like how you use the build. Again, I mean, we could talk. Oh, well, I see. This is one of the instead problems that of having those kind of fire groups mapped is I actually did this on stream as well. I like was planning to like showcase like the use of Gauss and it's Gauss. It's actually rails. In this case, I'm way too used to X. The use of rails and frags, but instead I clicked the trigger when I was on my banks fire group and I overheated myself and wasted some banks. Anyway, this is. Instead, the fire group with rails and frags, and there's nothing really special about it. Like rails are kind of delayed fire, like they fire up to a very insta, they hit scan and they hit up to 6 kilometers, and their convergence is kind of ideal, like 6 kilometers actually. If you target something that is at 6 kilometers, you find the convergence is effectively pinpoint. If you're firing at something that is kind of not that far away, the convergence is not pinpoint. But like if I was kind of hit at that, like. At this point, I would be able to kind of hit all 3 rails at that range. Well, I'm not going to do it because like kind of tired of getting bounties. So let's skip the bounties for the time being. And instead, fragmentation cannons are like rapid fire. So again, they fire extremely fast. They do a ginormous amount of sustained damage. But the problem with these is, if you want to do that ginormous amount of damage, you need consistently hit. And consistently hit something that's moving at 600 meters per second, kind of trying to get away from you, is not that easy. So, like, this was a weapon that, again, in hindsight, maybe we could have used something like double shot that has more alpha damage rather than this crazy sustained amount of damage. And note like that, I think I've just chewed through like half of my ammo already or something like that. So, anyway, that's just about it when it comes to the overall build and the like. Now let's talk about gank evasion for a moment and the techniques surrounding gank evasion. As I've learned, and by the way, as I mentioned, I'm not a professional PvPer. There are people who know far more than I about this. All I've done is what you saw yesterday, which is survive for a good amount of time with a lot of people on my tail. So at least some of the things I've done worked. So they've helped me. Hopefully they can help some other folks as well. But please don't take this as me claiming that I am somehow some kind of super expert. This is a domain that I know comparatively little. When it comes to anti-xenon combat, there I know, I think, as much as most. When it comes to player versus player combat, I know very little. But again, hopefully some of this stuff is helpful to folks overall. So something that's important to explain, which many experienced commanders will know, but many inexperienced or less experienced commanders will not know, and it matters a lot, is the difference between low wakes and high wakes. Low wakes is going to super cruise within your system. So if I charge my FSD, I am low waking at this point. I'm not going to do it because otherwise we'll get to a different point. Like low waking charges very fast and gets you to super cruise in the system you are in. again, this is called the low wake. Low wakes are subject to mass lock factors. So if there is a cutter which has a higher mass lock factor than you, anywhere around you, you will not be charging that low wake pretty much at all. As in, it will be charging, but it will be charged so slow that effectively it'll look like it's not charging. So in order to be able to low wake, you need to either be in a situation where you're the biggest boat in your immediate surroundings, so nobody can mass lock you. In that case, it will charge fast like it's charging fast here. Or you need to be fast enough that you can get away from ships that mass lock you, and then you can do the same. Because there's a limit to the distance at which ships can mass lock you. Again, people who are more experienced than me can tell you what that range is. I should be telling you for the purpose of this video, but the reality is I actually don't know it top of my head. It's significant enough that you don't want to be in a situation where you're trying to low wake away from, say, a cutter if a cutter is on your tail. So, again, one of the easiest ways to get yourself killed dead is to try and low wake in a situation where you are mass locked and someone is on your tail, and especially straight line as you kind of jump away. Which, again, results in very high likelihood to get you killed. Now, the good thing about low waking is that it charges fast, and it doesn't really need aiming of any kind. Like, you can be pointing anywhere, and if your FSD charges, you will get through, and you will kind of be popped up in Super Cruise. Now, in alternative and in contrast to low wakes are what instead are so-called high wakes. High wakes are jumps to a different system. High wakes, unlike low wakes, are not subject to mass lock. And this is very important because, again, if you're in a situation where you are even remotely possible to be mass locked by anyone who's dropping in your instance, you pretty much always want to high wake instead of low wake. In general, if you're doing gank evasion, you should be pretty much exclusively high waking to a different system. In fact, and even further, if you want to do next level gank evasion, the things you want to do are you want to pre-target a different system around you when you get into a system that you consider dangerous, so that you have a target set, and then you're going to be going around and doing your own whatever you're doing. Maybe you're even targeting your hostile, or maybe you're kind of like, I don't know, going around trying to deliver some cargo, like target some stuff. And then you want to map a key, which I think is under ship controls, under miscellaneous or navigation or something like that. Where would it be? It's not under here. It's probably under flight miscellaneous. It's probably under targeting. Targeting. There you go. Under targeting, there's a very important gank evasion button, which is called Target Next System in Route. This is a hotkey that lets you automatically drop whatever you targeted and target the next system in route. So if you are in a situation where, for instance, like you have hardpoints deployed, because I don't know, maybe you decided you can fight, you have something else targeted, like I have my carrier here, but you might be taking damage, and you decide that you kind of need to get the heck out of here. Well, I have 3 keys: store hardpoint, select next target system, charge FSD. Boom. Like 1, 2, 3, and I'm charging my FSD. Like, one very important thing to do when you're charging your FSD for a high wake is to keep in mind that it is slower than a low wake, but it cannot be mass locked, which is great, but it needs to have alignment to our target destination. So let's turn that off for a moment, because that way I'm overheating, because this crazy power plant I'm using tends to do that to me. A typical mistake that commanders incur is whenever they're charging their FSD, they're flying straight at their destination, right? So they're charging FSD, like fly assist on, boost on my destination. This is what is called straight lining. This results in you being the easiest target you could possibly ask for a ganker. So don't do this. Don't stare at your target in a straight line, even worse than flight assist on, when you're trying to get out, because it will get you killed, more likely than not. Don't do this. What do you want to do? ideally what you want to do is hit flight assist off, like boost in some lateral direction, go into a spin or something like that, then charge your FSD, which can charge just fine even though you're not pointing at anything while you're at it. And then once your FSD is finally charged after you've done all your fancy evasive maneuvers and whatnot, once it is charged, then great, point at it, flight assist on, and boom, you're out. This is the safest way to get out and the most reliable one. And if you do this correctly, so long as you have a minimum of shields and a ship that is not completely made of paper, with some exceptions that we're going to talk about in a minute, pretty much nobody will be able to kill you. Or at least not while pulling you out of Super Cruise. Now, let's say that you are in Super Cruise and you're getting pulled by somebody who is running a preempt shift drive interdictor that's coming after you and wants to gank you in this case. How do you deal with that? Well, the first and most important immediate thing is, as counterintuitively as it sounds, is to not fight the interdiction. You want to submit to interdiction, which you do by setting your throttle to 0. So you probably want a hotkey to also set your throttle to 0, unless you have a way with analog controls to kind of do it quickly manually. Setting your throttle to 0 submits to the interdiction and drops you into normal space as a submission to the interdiction. A submission to the interdiction has a significantly shorter time to charge your FSD than if you are to fight the interdiction and fail, which you are almost guaranteed to fail because interdictions massively advantage the interdicting player. So if you are interdicted, you're almost guaranteed to fail the minigame on a player versus player interdiction. So don't fight it. Instead, submit, wait for your FSD to finish its cooldown, and then you can high wake, as I mentioned earlier. Again, ideally, you would have a system pre-targeted, but for example, in this moment or in this situation, I don't have one because I didn't do what I described as a best practice earlier, which is to actually pre-target a system. So in that case, you would normally go into the galaxy map. Ideally, you have a hotkey for that one too. Select whatever nearby system you have, and then you can basically go for the same routine. The problem with that is, in many cases, going into the system map will result in you being pulled back straight to your main screen when you're under fire, because being under fire pulls you out of the galaxy map and back into your cockpit, which makes selecting a system in the galaxy map while being shot on incredibly difficult. If you're trying to select a system in order to get out and evade ganking, you want to do it from your left panel. You want to go to the bottom of your list, going up and wrapping around if need be. Pick whatever random system if you don't already have one targeted, and this you can do incredibly fast without having to go to your galaxy map. It's at the same time faster and far more reliable than going to the galaxy map. Again, yesterday I didn't do this as consistently because I had a lot of things unfiltered and I was looking for carriers and whatnot, but if you are in a system where ganking is a real risk and you're playing in open, this is something that you want to keep in mind. Keep in mind that even to be able to even see systems that you can select, you need to have systems enabled in your navigation filters. Otherwise, they won't show up and you're not going to be able to do this. But again, once you have that, same exact thing. Again, if you have hardpoints deployed, like same thing, 3 buttons. Store hardpoints, select next system, boom, charge FSD. Fly evasively, don't fly straight, flight assist off ideally, and once your FSD is charged, boom, point at your target, FA on, give it a boost if you need to get speed, and you're out. Now, another thing that is important in terms of gank evasion is trying to get speed and trying to get not shot at, or at least not excessively shot at, when you do get pulled. And when you do get pulled, especially if you submit to the interdiction, you're going to be placed in a situation where you drop and the attacker is going to be right behind you. So they're going to have an advantage there. But if you submit, chances are that you will also be the first in the instance to drop, assuming comparable PC specs and networking. But you'll be the one that essentially forms the instance. Somebody eventually connects into you as a general rule. What do you do then? Again, you drop, you say you're pulled. One common thing that people try to do is they try to run. So they'll get their speed up, they'll boost, more often than not in flight assist on. Again, this is one of the things that get you killed. What do you need to do instead? Like, the moment you drop is flight assist off. First thing, flight assist off. First thing you do, give it a spin, like point towards where your attacker is going to spawn, so right behind you, so like if you're going backwards, and then give it a boost straight at them. You want to boost straight at your attacker and ideally go straight past them, because it's going to take them a freaking big amount of time for them to actually get you past, turn around, and then come after you basically jousted them on the way straight into the instance. But it's the safest way, and it's counterintuitive, because like boosting straight into the face of an attacker, or ideally not straight into their face, but somewhat dodging them, is counterintuitive. Like, normally people panic and sort of get afraid and try to get away by kind of boosting away from someone. That is the worst thing you can do. Like, again, you want to stare at them, turn around, flight assist off, and boost straight at them. And while you're dancing, and while you're not in a position to charge your FSD yet, maybe because you haven't selected your target system, like I have here in this case as well, you want to be in flight assist off, and you want to be flying evasively, which generally means never in a straight line, keep boosting, change your vector, don't be predictable, don't let people train a gun on you so that you cannot expect where you're going to go. This is kind of how you want to fly evasively if you're trying to get away. There are going to be situations where, again, you're just trying to get away. That's when you want 4 pips in sys and 2 in eng, or depending on situations, you may want to drop a few pips into eng and further, because you want that extra speed, especially if you have a ship that is faster than whoever is chasing you, but you need to know the speed of ships, so it's a bit more complicated. It's safer in general to fly 4 to 0 in terms of pips if you're flying for Gank-Evasion. Again, if you need to get out, select a system, boom, hardpoint stored, select next system, frameshift drive charging, and fly evasively. And once you're again straight on target, flight assist on, give it some throttle, and boom, we're out. Now, there are some special cases. Now this is Gank-Evasion 101. This is like, how do you get away from ganks, and how do you stay alive from situations where you have at least a modicum of like shields. Like, honestly, if you're in a complete paper ship that goes 200 meters per second, I mean, you know, good luck. There's like only so much that technique and skill can do if your ship is really truly not fit for combat in the least. But so long as you have at least some basic amount of shield integrity, and your hull is not completely made of paper, and your speed of your ship is not completely in total garbage, then you should be able to kind of consistently use these techniques to get away. Now, what are some special cases? Now, some special cases have to do with some kind of special weapons. Now, the most notorious of such weapons, let's say you're pulled, let's say that you, again, flight assist off, boost, get in the face of your attacker, boost past them, and off you go. But let's say you don't do this particularly well, then you go in a different direction, which happens to be the same direction they're going, and they get a lock on you and get close enough, and they drop what is known as a ground bomb on you. So they drop a containment missile. A containment missile reboots your FSD, so effectively turns it off and keeps it off for, as we mentioned, full... oh wow, there's somebody, NPCs here. And turns it off and keeps it off for a total of 18 seconds if they use the super groms, as they're called, like the groms with experimentals. So 18 seconds is a very long time, trust me, to survive if someone's out to get you. So in that case, you want to keep flight assist off, and again, you want to keep flying evasively, trying to kind of fly in an unpredictable pattern, and if you can get into a situation where you can fly directly and joust your attacker, that is ideal, but be careful because like flying in the face of someone who has hardpoints deployed, unlike at the beginning, where they don't still have to deploy your hardpoints, is dangerous. So like doing the same maneuver I was describing at the beginning later on in the fight is a lot more tricky. So there, if you have the unfortunate sort of encounter of somebody who kind of manages to kind of like reboot your FSD, you want to fly as evasively as long as possible and just wait out the timer through which your FSD is rebooting. At some point, your FSD will reboot, and this one reboots in 2 seconds, and you will sort of finally be able to get out, and boom, same thing. This is a low wake, so this will kind of get me nowhere. Same strategy as before, select the system, high wake charging, continue to fly evasively, and once your FSD is finally charged, flight assist on, align, you got throttle, and boom, you're out. This is it. I mean, it's obviously harder to do in practice while you're getting shot at and sort of panicking because it might be the first time you are getting shot at. So don't take it the wrong way if the first time you attempt this, it doesn't work. Because chances are it may not work the first few times you attempt it. But as I've demonstrated yesterday, I think, if you pick up on these techniques, it does work consistently, even if the whole freaking world is after you. So it works. It is a technique that you can have in your arsenal, and sort of a legend of the Un-Gank-Able Corsair is probably more about ungankable skills of a commander who knows how to get away in a semi-decent ship than it is about any intrinsic characteristics of a ship. And even then, keep in mind, nothing works 100% of the time, right? So there are going to be situations where you make a mistake or an attacker gets particularly lucky for some reason or another, and you don't get away. It happens. It's a video game, as high as emotions can run, always remember that, it's all your imagination and fun and games. So something that you should always consider at the back of your mind. So that's it. I'm happy, look, guys, to take any questions you have in the comments below. I'm going to pin this build, noting that, again, it's the build I used. It isn't necessarily the best build to gank evade. I'm sure people with more experience than me might have even better suggestions or better comments. But it worked. I mean, again, it remained alive until the final showdown for 2 hours while being hunted by pretty much everyone under the sun. So it's not that terrible, I think, we've demonstrated. That's it. Glory to mankind. Commander Mechan, over and out. Woo! My camera's going crazy. Bye now.